Tensions rise over election hacking as more call for naming and shaming Russia. Assange says he has more docs to release on WikiLeaks. VDOS DDoS service earned its masters $600,000 over the last 2 years. GovRat 2.0 is out in the wild. Congress reports its investigation of the OPM hack. Intel sells its security unit, which will go back to its old McAfee name. And the FBI says they've nabbed the crackers with attitude. Time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, Recorded Future, the real-time threat intelligence company. Recorded Future's patented technology continuously analyzes the entire web to give cybersecurity analysts unmatched insight into emerging threats. We read their dailies at the CyberWire, and you can too. Sign up for Recorded Future's Cyber Daily email to get the top trending technical indicators crossing the web. Cyber news, targeted industries, threat actors, exploited vulnerabilities, malware, and suspicious IP addresses. Subscribe today to stay ahead of cyber attacks. They watch the web so you have time to think and make the best decisions possible for your enterprise's security. Go to recordedfuture.com/intel to subscribe for free threat intelligence updates from Recorded Future. It's timely, it's solid, and it's on the money. That's recordedfuture.com/intel, and we thank Recorded Future for sponsoring our show. I'm Dave Bittner in Baltimore with your CyberWire summary and week in review for Friday, September 9th, 2016. There was little ambiguity at this week's Intelligence and National Security Summit. The U.S. and Russia are clearly positioned as adversaries in cyberspace. That the U.S. would rather not have to engage in an ill-defined and poorly delimited cyber conflict with Russia was equally obvious. But many of the summit's participants were prepared to echo U.S. Secretary of Defense Carter's warning to Russia that it should avoid interfering in democratic processes. In the case of some members of Congress and experts from the private sector, they were willing to amplify that warning. The senior members of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence called for more forthright attribution, more naming and shaming. The interference in democratic processes, of course, refers to what's being characterized informally, albeit all but officially, as a Russian government campaign to disrupt upcoming U.S. elections. Such a campaign is under active investigation, as Director Comey said yesterday at the summit when asked to comment on the matter. Direct hacking of voting is feared, and intrusion into state election databases has fed those concerns. But such Russian activity, as has been observed, is more consistent with influence operation than classic cyber attack. Observers see the probable goal as undermining confidence in U.S. institutions to the general detriment of the U.S. and the advantage of Russia. Most of the interest in the alleged Russian campaign continues to center on what Russian intelligence services may have collected from political parties, especially the Democratic Party, and from candidate Clinton's State Department-era private email server. WikiLeaks' Julian Assange, objectively aligned with Russia's government, has promised to release as many as 100,000 pages of new material related to Hillary Clinton. No firm date is promised, but Assange says he'll leak the material before the election. Krebs on Security reports that VDOS, an Israel-based booter DDoS attack service, has earned its masters some $600,000 over the past 2 years. The operator's criminal customers use VDOS in their attacks on targeted online services. InfoArmor has published an update on GovRat, a criminal campaign now in version 2.0 and exfiltrating data from U.S. government, military, and defense industrial-based targets. InfoArmor concludes that, quote, the threat actor is working with a highly sophisticated group of cybercriminals that are selling stolen and fake digital certificates for mobile and PC-based malware code signing used to bypass modern AV solutions for other possible APT campaigns, end quote. The congressional report on 2015's massive OPM breach is out. We spoke with Cylance's Malcolm Harkins and got the inside perspective on the breach. We'll hear from him later in the show. The big industry news this week was Intel's sale of a controlling interest in its cybersecurity unit to private equity firm TGP. Intel Security, as the unit was called, will revert to its better-known name of McAfee, despite challenges from the original founder, John McAfee. Intel paid $7.7 billion for McAfee in 2010. It sold 51% of the unit for $4.2 billion. Intel will retain 49% of McAfee. And finally, remember the crackers with attitude, the boyos who allegedly got into the U.S. DCIs and DNIs and other numerous private email accounts? The G-men yesterday popped two millennial gentlemen, Andrew Otto Boggs, age 22, and Justin Gray Liverman, age 24, and charged them with various computer crimes in connection with the incident. The gentlemen allegedly worked by social engineering and not by applying any mad technical skills. That social engineering involved impersonating, the feds say, allegedly, Verizon techs and FBI IT support. Boggs and Liverman will soon plead their case in the Eastern District of Virginia. Observers expect a swift adjudication, that Alexandria court's not called the Rocket Docket for nothing. So, North Carolina, it turns out the alleged crackers weren't from Nutley or Ronkonkoma, after all, as some of our stringers had speculated, but allegedly, we stress, from North Wilkesboro and Morehead City, North Carolina. All persons accused of crimes are entitled to the presumption of innocence, or so our lawyers tell us. Time for another moment from our sponsor, Recorded Future. Our Fund 2016 is coming, and Washington, D.C.'s got it. Join Recorded Future and other leaders in the threat intelligence space this October 5th and 6th. Get industry insight, hear from top cybersecurity and corporate strategy experts as they share their ideas and experiences. Teresa Shea, now of In-Q-Tel, formerly NSA's chief of SIGINT. Christopher Mascaro, director of global cyber threat intelligence at First Data. John Scott Railton, Senior Research Fellow at the University of Toronto's Citizen Lab. Elias Ladopoulos, you may know him as Acid Freak, founder and CEO at Supermassive Core. Robert M. Lee, founder and CEO at Dragos Security, and course author for SANS 4578. And finally, Joe Navarro, former FBI agent, body language expert, and best-selling author. If you're a threat intelligence enthusiast, register for free now at recordedfuture.com/rfun. That's recordedfuture.com/RFUN. And we thank Recorded Future for sponsoring our show. And I'm joined by Marcus Roschecker. He's the Cybersecurity Program Manager for the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Marcus, some privacy groups are not happy with the Department of Homeland Security about a social media proposal that they've come up with. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there's a new proposal out by the Department of Homeland Security that says that anyone coming into the United States through a visa waiver program would now have to also submit any kind of information on any kind of online presence that they have. So that means those individuals traveling to the United States in their visa waiver program application would submit usernames or other social media identifiers, Facebook, Twitter handles, so that they would submit that kind of information on their applications so that DHS and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection could presumably investigate any kind of online media presence, any kind of online postings to when they review the application of the individual traveling to the United States.
So on the surface, that doesn't seem terribly unreasonable, but there are a number of privacy groups who take issue with this.
Right. So DHS is saying a lot can be learned about an individual if you take a look at their social media or their online presence. And DHS thinks that they can then more easily or identify potential terrorists or other threat actors before they come to the United States. Of course, privacy and civil liberties groups are very opposed to this proposal because they say it's a fundamental infringement on the right to speech and the right of opinion, and it can potentially put a damper on people's willingness to post online and to post their views and to post their religious views online. There's a real concern among privacy groups that this proposal is an infringement or obstacle to free speech and freedom of expression.
And so it is just a proposal, so I suppose there'll be a comment period before anything is settled on?
Absolutely. Right now, this is a proposal. DHS is seeking comments on this proposal. We'll see, what they get back. I know that a lot of, in the privacy groups, civil liberties groups have already responded with strong opposition to this. I'm sure DHS will be getting a lot of comments about this proposal, and they'll they'll take that into account and they'll see if they need to refine the proposal, and then we'll see what happens to the proposal in the end, if it goes through or if DHS decides to scrap it.
All right, we'll keep an eye on it. Marcus Rauschecker, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much.
I'd like to take a break and tell you about an exciting CyberWire event happening next month, the 3rd Annual Women in Cybersecurity Reception, taking place September 27th at the Columbus Center on the beautiful waterfront in downtown Baltimore. The Women in Cybersecurity Reception highlights and celebrates the value and successes of women in the cybersecurity industry. The focus of the event is networking, and it brings together leaders from the private sector, academia, and government from across the region, and women at varying points on their career spectrum. The reception also provides a forum for women seeking cybersecurity careers to connect with the technical and business professionals who are shaping the future of our industry. It's not a marketing event, it's just about creating connection. This year, we're pleased to be partnering with the great people over at the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland, CAMI. If your company is interested in supporting this important event, we have some great sponsorship opportunities available. We're also partnering with Maryland Art Place to have a special work of art created for the event that attendees can take home with them. As it's been in previous years, this is an invitation-only event. We do it this way to ensure a mix of women with diverse backgrounds and at different career levels. If you're interested in getting an invitation to this year's event, tell us a little bit about yourself and request one at our website, thecyberwire.com/WCS. That's thecyberwire.com/WCS. We look forward to hearing from you. Once again, there are still a few remaining sponsorships available, so if you'd like to show your support for women in cybersecurity with all of the recognition and promotion that goes with it, we'd love to hear from you. The U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Government Reform released their report on the OPM data breach this week, subtitled How the Government Jeopardized Our National Security for More Than a Generation. My guest today is Malcolm Harkins, Chief Security and Trust Officer at Cylance, a cybersecurity company who is named specifically in the report for their part in detection and remediation of the breach. I asked Malcolm Harkins for his take on the report.
I thought the report itself was quite thorough and complete. It seemed like a very thoughtful and well-written, and one of those reports that they turned over all the rocks, and my read of it looks like they summarized the key items quite well, and it for me was very useful in looking through not only the details of the timelines, the analysis, but I also think the conclusions that they came up with.
Can you take us back and sort of walk us through the timeline of what happened with this breach?
Well, if you read through the report, there's in many ways a little bit of a couple different timelines. One of them started out a few years ago, long before this ever got into the press. In 2012, they had established that attackers had access to the OPM network, according to the US CERT, and found malware resident on their servers since 2012. And so it evolved. You could look at it back into that time period, but also some things in 2013. But 2014 is really when they had the first, what I'd say, notification from the US CERT of data exfiltration from their network. And that was what created what they called their Big Bang strategy, where they spent a few months trying to figure out when and how things were occurring so they could observe the intrusion. And then they had their Big Bang strategy, which was essentially the extraction and remediation of the intrusion from their environment that they went through. Now, what I think most of us seem to remember is really what happened in 2015 when the notification went out that they had been breached. And that's really what caused the awareness, what then triggered the Oversight Committee to do this investigation.
And Cylance is mentioned specifically in this report. What was your role in the discovery and the remediation?
So our role dates back in multiple things. Into the 2014 time period, they were looking at our product, doing some evaluation of it at that time. But in reality, what happened was in April of 2015, an individual in the OPM organization got kind of the first indications of malware that was occurring. And what they had done was they brought a silence expert on site to help facilitate the discovery and then installation of our Silence Protect product. And then from there, we worked with them very closely through that rollout and then the remediation and essentially elimination of the intrusion from their environment. What we did was we found the specific instances of the malicious code when they had already had some detection. So OPM had already had some idea that some things were not right, that were found through other means and other mechanisms. And then they ran those samples against us, which then told them, okay, this is something that is malicious. And that's when we got the engagement. We sent people in to help. We started rolling out the product. And as you can see in the report, there were some items that, as they started doing that rollout, characterized as, they were kind of lit up like a Christmas tree, because once they rolled us out and they started getting the visibility to what was on their systems, there was right around 2,000 pieces of malicious code that we had identified.
What are the takeaways for you?
I think the takeaways are a few things. One, when you evaluate a new technology and a new set of controls and a new way of doing things, like OPM had the opportunity to do starting in 2014, and then again, if you look through the timeline and you look through the conclusions, if they had deployed us in those time periods, the report is pretty conclusive. It would have prevented and mitigated essentially all of this from having occurred. That's a little bit, hindsight's 20/20, but I think there's a lesson in that for everyone. And it's a new approach, it's a new way of thinking, but it does change the risk dynamic. So that's one. Two, perhaps the leadership challenge. And I think that's a broader thing that when I read the report, that I think is perhaps a systemic issue across the industry in terms of having policies, not implementing them, having an idea of what I can do to solve the risk, not moving forward with it, not getting the budget and authority, having a level of perhaps more independence of the security team and the security officer from the IT team. Because again, if the IT team's measured on availability, rollout of functionality, and cost, I'm a big believer in structure drives behavior. You get what you measure. That's an element, I think, of some of this stuff. And then finally, I think the other big learning and conclusion out of this report is there is hope. You can achieve a level of security that is unprecedented. I think you can achieve a level of flattening and lowering your total cost of controls that's unprecedented when you focus on prevention. And then finally, I think with the right mindset, security can enable the business.
That's Malcolm Harkins from Cylance. You can hear more of our discussion where we talk about the responsibilities of board members, proactive versus reactive approaches to security, and how some security professionals have what Mr. Harkins describes as a hero dilemma next week on our website, thecyberwire.com. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, along with interviews, our glossary, and more, visit thecyberwire.com. Thanks to all of our sponsors who make the CyberWire possible. The CyberWire podcast is produced by Pratt Street Media. Our editor is John Petrick. Our social media editor is Jennifer Iben, and our technical editor is Chris Russell. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie. I'm Dave Bittner. Have a great weekend, everybody.